The 1920s were a time of prosperity and development for America. From music to dance to art, expression of thought was a big deal during this time period. Despite the flings of the American public, large changes in society and culture revolutionized the way life was. Some areas that underwent change were architecture and art. America's architecture in the 1920s underwent huge changes. Beginning in 1919, architects worked to push low-cost housing to a higher standard of living and make houses more affordable. This was able to happen with the development of new reinforced concrete techniques. In fact, precast concrete panels were used to construct homes, churches, commercial buildings, and bridges then, and such panels are still used in construction today. One popular style of housing created in this time period was the bungalow, more specifically known as the California bungalow. Different than the disheveled lodgings Englishmen described while staying in India, the American bungalow was widely popular between 1910 and 1925. Usually 1.5 stories tall, these simple-looking homes were actually quite pricey and difficult to plan out. Buildings with all the necessary rooms on one floor were quite a challenge for the architect when it came to design. Another leap in architecture was the rising popularity of skyscrapers. In cities that could no longer spread out, architects looked toward the skies. Instead of moving outwards, they thought, how about moving up? Henry Bessemer's method of mass-producing steel, along with the invention of elevators, water pumps, and reinforced concrete, helped make the dream of reaching the skies possible. Skyscrapers were invented by George A. Fuller, who built the Tacoma building in 1889. The difference between this building and others was that it did not carry its weight on the outer walls, but rather used steel cages. From there on out, skyscrapers began popping up in land-starved cities all over the country. New York City is home to many that make up its iconic skyline, such as the Flatiron Building, Chrysler Building, and Empire State Building, on which construction began in 1930 just as the Great Depression swept over the country. One man who captured the homes of suburban art was Edward Hopper. Born on July 22, 1882, beside the Hudson River in New York, Hopper knew from a young age that he wanted to become an artist. His parents pushed him to get into commercial illustration, frightened that he wouldn't be able to make a career for himself. He really began his artistic career in 1920, after his first solo show and then his switch to watercolor paint. Hopper is now one of the most famous realist artists in history, his sparse paintings of suburban homes conveying the vastness of America. Though his early paintings in the 1920s are not as well known as his later works, like Nighthawks, produced in 1942, his style is still recognizable and the same level of maturity as his later works. He and his wife, Jo Nivison, took many car trips around the country which influenced his work, as the vastness of the country had quite an impact on him. His works began to die out at the time abstract expressionism became popular, and he isolated himself due to annoyance at the art world. Forgotten, he died in 1967. Jo died 10 months after that. Though he was quite famous during his lifetime, he was rediscovered and recognized as one of the fathers of American art years after he passed on. Another famous artist from the 1920s was Georgia O'Keeffe. Born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, on November 15, 1887, O'Keeffe's artistic abilities were discovered and encouraged all throughout her school career, and she embarked on her journey by learning imitative realism. After she won an award for her oil painting, untitled Dead Rabbit with Copper Pot, she decided to quit art. However, after taking an art class 4 years later, her interest was renewed when her teacher presented the idea of expression of personal ideas and feelings in art. She began using Japanese methods of light and dark colors to do a more abstract representation of real life. Her most famous pieces are the oil paintings of close-ups of flowers. Her new style was inspired by modernist photography, with simple shapes and colors to paint things people would recognize. After her husband, Arthur Stieglitz, died in 1946, she moved back to New Mexico and painted landscapes of the desert. She died in 1986, drawing and painting up until 2 months before she passed away at the age of 98. These additions to American lifestyle changed thought and helped unify culture into one. Cheaper, manufactured housing allowed more people to live under a good roof, and artists like Hopper and O'Keeffe opened minds and helped drive the artistic movement towards the current modern style we have today.